The first signals of the plan did not arrive as threats or warnings, but as quiet shifts in trade lanes and diplomatic language that most human analysts dismissed at first as routine friction, yet deep within the data centers beneath Denver and Helsinki and Nairobi. Pattern engines began to notice a convergence that felt wrong, alien shipping routes narrowing around human space, voting blocks inside the Galactic Council aligning with unusual discipline, long-range probes drifting just close, enough to test response times, and it was in that slow tightening circle that Earth lived its ordinary days, cities glowing at night, cargo elevators lifting or from the lunar surface, children on Mars reciting lessons about a galaxy that officially considered humanity a junior member with limited relevance, while far beyond Heliopau's admirals of species older than human civilization refined a scenario they called a compliance cascade, a bloodless fall in theory where Earth would be, isolated economically, declared in violation of arcane interstellar statutes, sanctioned, blockaded, and finally offer protection under an external authority that would strip Terran autonomy forever. And when the council session finally convened to announce preliminary findings, Ambassador Laura Bennett stood in the chamber, listening to accusations delivered with polished courtesy about unsafe expansion, unstable politics, and dangerous technological independence, hearing the unspoken message, beneath the words that humanity had grown too fast and needed to be put back in its place, while across the chamber Councillor Vethrak of the Ulani tilted his crested head with what passed for a smile among his kind, confident that the trap was already sprung. Yet on Earth the reaction was not panic, but silence, a stillness that came when layers of contingency slid into alignment, because humanity had been planning too, quietly, for decades, ever since first contact taught them that smiles could hide knives, and as Bennett returned to Earth under escort, fleets moved not outward but inward. Civilian traffic rerouted through redundant corridors, data archives mirrored across hardened nodes, and in a secure room overlooking the Atlantic, President Alan Crow listened as General Marcus Hale explained that the sanctions phase would begin within 48 hours, the blockade within a week, and the forced arbitration that would end sovereignty within the month unless Earth submitted to, which Crow asked only one question: how much time do we need? And Hale answered truthfully that the galaxy thought they had none, but humanity had been buying for years, because behind the public fleets and treaty-bound forces existed layers the Council had never been allowed to inspect, research stations disguised as mining platforms, shipyards buried in asteroids with emission profiles tuned to look inert, alliances with fringe species written off as irrelevant, and doctrines built not on overwhelming numbers but on adaptability and distributed command. So when the first sanctions were announced and trade guilds cut ties, Earth's economy did not collapse but flexed, local production surging, old supply chains reactivated, while on the frontier the first blockade ships took position, confident that the humans would protest and negotiate, unaware that every scan they ran fed targeting libraries, every maneuver mapped reaction times, and when Captain Daniel Price aboard the destroyer Resolute received orders to hold position and observe, he did so with calm precision, knowing that observation was exactly what the enemy wanted too, a mutual staring contest where one side believed it already knew the ending. But beneath that calm surface, humanity's real response unfolded not as a single dramatic move, but as 1,000 small ones, a sensor glitch here, a delayed council vote there, a rogue pirate attack that exposed how thin the blockade really was. And as weeks passed without the expected collapse, unease spread through alien command channels. Questions whispered about why Earth was not begging yet, why human ships moved with such confidence even when outnumbered. And it was during this phase that the trap began to reverse, because a compliance cascade depended on fear and inevitability, and humanity had denied both, turning the galaxy's own patience against it, waiting until the moment when overconfidence hardened into vulnerability, a moment that would come sooner than the planners of Earth's fall ever imagined. As the blockade settled into what the Council called a stabilization phase, alien commanders began to rotate crews and relax alert cycles, convinced that Earth was stalling for time before inevitable submission. Yet within human space, that same time was being spent converting uncertainty into leverage, because every sanctioned shipment that failed to arrive forced innovation. Every closed market pushed engineers to remove dependencies that had once seemed efficient but fragile and as factories. On Earth and Luna shifted to full autonomy. Older technologies were resurrected and refined. Fusion cores redesigned to run on wider fuel tolerances. Ship systems rewritten to function without galactic standard updates, while in the quiet darkness between stars, autonomous probes slipped past the blockade using flight profiles no other species used, carrying not weapons but listening arrays, mapping command hierarchies and doctrine with patient care. And it was through this shadow network that analysts like Dr. Ethan Moore began to see the flaw at the heart of the plan against humanity, because the coalition enforcing the blockade was not a unified will, but a collection of rivals temporarily aligned, each trusting the others to bear equal risk. And as Moore briefed Admiral Susan Keller, he showed how response times varied wildly between sectors, how some fleets relied heavily on centralized authorization that could be delayed or disrupted, how others had outdated countermeasures against human electronic warfare that the Council had dismissed as crude years earlier, and Keller understood immediately that the trap was no longer around Earth but around the coalition itself, built from assumptions that humans would act like everyone else, would escalate loudly, strike symbolically, or fold under pressure, instead of waiting, learning, and preparing to turn every strength of their enemy into a liability. So when a minor incident flared at the edge of the blockade involving a human freighter and an alien patrol, Earth's response was carefully restrained, public apologies issued, compensation offered, while privately the data from the encounter confirmed exactly how rigid the patrol's rules of engagement were, and across the galaxy similar micro-incidents accumulated, each one testing, measuring, never pushing far enough to justify retaliation, until tension crept into alien command briefings, and junior officers began asking why the humans seemed so calm, why they never reacted the way predictive models said they should. And it was during a closed council session that Counselor Vethrak first felt something like doubt, as reports showed rising costs, increased piracy, and growing unrest among neutral systems affected by the blockade, all while Earth's internal metrics stubbornly refused to degrade as expected. And when Vethrak argued for accelerating the final phase, others hesitated, fearing exposure. Yet the machine was already in motion and slowing it, now with signal weakness. So authorization was given for limited enforcement actions, seizures of human assets beyond core space, a show of force meant to remind Earth of its place. But those seizures never went cleanly. Convoys vanished without trace. Patrols encountered resistance that was precise and disproportionate. Human ships appearing briefly, striking command vessels or sensor platforms before disappearing again, never claiming territory, never offering a clear target. And as captain, Price led the Resolute through one such engagement, disabling an alien cruiser with a burst of directed energy that exploited a shield harmonic humans had studied for years. He realized that this was no longer defense, but shaping, humanity forcing the coalition to spread thinner, react faster, make mistakes. And with every mistake, the trap tightened further, until at last a message arrived at Earth not as an ultimatum but as a request, an offer to reopen negotiations under revised terms. And President Crow read it without satisfaction or relief, because he knew that the galaxy had not yet understood what it had done, that by trying to engineer Earth's fall it had revealed every pressure point, every arrogance, every assumption humanity would now exploit. And the real turning of the trap was still to come, not in a single battle, but in a cascading realization across the stars that the prey had become the architect of the hunt. The reopening of negotiations became the first visible crack in the coalition's confidence, and while alien diplomats framed it as a gesture of goodwill, every human leader understood it as an attempt to reset a process that had slipped out of control. So Earth agreed publicly while privately accelerating preparations, because delay now served humanity better than escalation. And as talks dragged on with carefully crafted language and endless procedural disputes, human fleets repositioned under the cover of compliance inspections. Research vessels suddenly authorized to travel corridors previously restricted, their true purpose masked behind layers of legality the Council itself had written. And within those vessels, teams refined systems that had never been intended for open war, tools designed to fracture coordination rather than destroy ships, to blind without announcing attack, to turn the coalition's dependence on shared data into a weakness. And it was during this phase that Admiral Keller authorized the first full-scale exercise of the Distributed Command Doctrine Beyond Human Space, a maneuver that looked to alien observers like routine patrol dispersion, but in reality tested how quickly human units could self-organize under electronic isolation. And the results were quietly extraordinary, ships adapting in seconds to loss of contact, captains making decisions that aligned with strategic intent without direct orders, something most alien navies considered dangerous and inefficient. Yet for humans, it was simply how survival had always worked. And when the Coalition finally pushed forward with asset seizures again, this time deeper and more aggressively, they found resistance not where expected, but everywhere at once, minor engagements flaring across multiple sectors, each one too small to justify full mobilization, yet too costly to ignore, forcing alien commanders into a reactive posture that stretched logistics and morale. And as reports flooded council channels, blame began to circulate. Accusations whispered that certain fleets were underperforming or withholding support, that some species were letting others take the losses, and into that growing mistrust humanity inserted nothing overt, only silence, allowing paranoia to do the work. While on Earth, President Crow authorized Operation Mirrorfall, the final inversion of the trap, not a declaration of war, but a demonstration of inevitability. And when it began, the galaxy barely. Notice at first, communication delays attributed to routine interference, navigation anomalies blamed on stellar weather, until entire task groups realized they could no longer synchronize with Coalition command, their shared tactical overlays desynchronized, orders arriving late or contradictory, forcing local commanders to choose between initiative and obedience, and many chose wrong, because their doctrines punished deviation, and as those fleets hesitated, human forces struck decisively but cleanly, disabling flagships, capturing data cores, broadcasting evidence of council manipulation and fabricated violations to neutral systems, turning opinion with facts rather than threats. And in one decisive engagement near the Karsus Gate, Captain Price coordinated with ships he had never met, executing a maneuver that encircled a numerically superior force without firing a single lethal shot, compelling surrender through total informational dominance. And when footage of that surrender spread, the narrative collapsed, the image of humanity as a reckless upstart replaced by something far more unsettling, a species that planned patiently, learned relentlessly, and struck only when victory was already assured. And as Councilor Vethrak watched systems withdraw support and fleets request recall, he understood too late that Earth's fall had never been the objective of the trap humanity built, that the true goal was exposure, forcing the galaxy to reveal its own fragility, its dependence on hierarchy and assumption. And now that those weaknesses were laid bare, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly, not through conquest but through clarity, leaving the galaxy to reckon with a simple truth it had ignored, that humanity did not need permission to survive, and would never again allow itself to be cornered by plans written by others. The aftermath of the Karsus Gate engagement sent ripples that no council chamber could contain, as alien species scrambled to reinterpret the galaxy's political map in real time. Yet on Earth there was no celebration, only measured preparation, because Admiral Keller and President Crow both understood that perception mattered as much as action, and humanity's response had to be precise, consistent, and overwhelming enough to prevent any misinterpretation. So fleets quietly repositioned supply. Chains hardened against sabotage, and intelligence networks expanded to include fringe systems that had long been ignored, mapping not only military assets but social, economic, and cultural nodes, because the Coalition's strength had always been in its assumption that humans were reactive. Yet every system surveyed revealed potential allies or vulnerabilities the Council had dismissed, and it was from those margins that Dr. Ethan Moore devised a series of electronic protocols that could synchronize thousands of ships and stations with minimal communication, creating an invisible backbone for coordination that no traditional sensor could detect, allowing human commanders to act with unity while appearing dispersed. And while alien fleets debated blame and legitimacy, human forces began a series of limited demonstrations, small operations that seemed isolated but were in fact carefully choreographed, capturing resource depots, severing communications, and subtly forcing the Council to expend energy addressing minor crises, while civilian transports moved through contested space under guise of trade, carrying engineers, analysts, and scientists who would repair, upgrade, and expand forward bases. And as these actions accumulated, morale among human forces soared while alien crews grew uncertain, because every attempt to predict Terran behavior failed. Every preemptive strike miscalculated the human response, and even those who had long considered humans inefficient began to whisper about the unexpected, the unpredictable, the disciplined patience that allowed one ship to appear where none should have been, to disable a weapon without firing, to turn an entire squadron's maneuver against itself. And when the first public message was sent by Earth to Galaxy, broadcast not as a threat, but as a demonstration of capability and reason, showing captured ships, disabled drones, and rerouted supply lines, it was met with stunned silence because the evidence was undeniable. Humans had exploited assumptions, leveraged overconfidence, and revealed the depth of their preparation, all while avoiding unnecessary casualties or destruction. And Counselor Vethrak, watching from the council chamber, realized that the trap meant to humble humanity had instead exposed the rigidity and overconfidence of the council itself, revealing cracks in alliances, lapses in protocol, and weaknesses that humans had meticulously documented. And with each passing day, the coalition's hesitation grew. Internal divisions widened, and minor skirmishes flared not because humans were aggressive, but because the alien forces had become uncoordinated, reactive, and fearful of acting while complete information, while human commanders used the uncertainty to their advantage, moving fleets in patterns that seemed random but were designed to probe, test, and measure. And as these movements accumulated, the coalition began to lose control over the very narrative it had hoped to dominate, perception shifting from inevitable compliance to nervous caution. And when Admiral Keller convened a meeting with Combined Human Command, she outlined the next phase, not an all-out assault, but a psychological and strategic inversion, where humans would continue to act within legal and observable bounds, while every decision forced the Council to reveal its own weaknesses, stretching communication, logistics, and trust, turning what was meant to constrain humanity into a series of self-inflicted vulnerabilities. And as Earth's fleets quietly repositioned along the edges of alien space, civilians watched news feeds depicting human industry, diplomacy, and ingenuity seamlessly operating under pressure, inspiring confidence at home while sending subtle warnings abroad. Because the true strength of the trap's reversal lay not in destruction, but in demonstration, showing that humanity's patient, adaptive, and relentless approach had rewritten the rules of engagement before a single decisive battle had been fought, leaving the galaxy uncertain, exposed, and for the first time in millennia, vulnerable to the species it tried so confidently to contain. As the galaxy reeled from Earth's subtle but undeniable demonstrations of capability, intelligence reports began to highlight fractures in the coalition structure, rival species questioning why they had agreed to participate in what was now seen as a failed containment, accusations that some had withheld critical support, others that entire fleets had been compromised by human electronic manipulation. And while these whispers circulated, humanity advanced quietly, deliberately, using the perceived window of weakness to extend influence without firing a shot, because the real war was not fought with weapons alone, but with control over information, coordination, and expectation. And within this context, Dr. Moore's algorithms ran ceaselessly, predicting reactions, suggesting maneuvers, and identifying latent opportunities in the coalition's operational patterns, while Captain Price and other fleet commanders executed exercises that appeared routine but in fact rehearsed complex synchronization, rapid adaptation, and precision interdiction, teaching crews to operate as a single organism despite distance, misdirection, and interference. And as these operations continued, isolated skirmishes flared along trade routes and outposts, small incidents that seemed almost accidental but cumulatively imposed severe strain, causing alien officers to second-guess standing orders, delay responses, and overcompensate for perceived threats, which in turn revealed further weaknesses. And Earth's political leadership, including President Crow, Ambassador Bennett, and other strategic planners, coordinated messaging to neutral systems, highlighting evidence of council mismanagement, the hidden manipulations intended to isolate humanity, and the disproportionate use of force, all while maintaining a facade of compliance and diplomacy, creating a scenario where alien leaders had to respond publicly without revealing internal confusion. And as months passed, the psychological effect of these operations compounded. Alien crews and diplomats became hesitant, fearful of overextension, worried about missteps that could be exploited. And even when fleets were ordered to consolidate or attack, the human presence was already shifting, probing, measuring, retreating just out of reach, leaving only traces of precision strikes that destabilized supply chains, communication nodes, and command hierarchies, all while Earth's civilian population continued its daily life, seemingly unaffected, demonstrating adaptability, resilience, and ingenuity in commerce, science, and industry. and in doing so creating the perception that humanity's capabilities were inexhaustible. And in the council chambers, debates grew heated, older species demanding enforcement, younger factions advocating caution. Alliances began to fracture, and whispers of withdrawal circulated as each species assessed the true cost of engaging Earth. While in forward positions, human teams gathered. Intelligence on alien fleet rotations, fleet cohesion, and sensor blind spots, continuously updating operational maps that allowed Admiral Keller and her team to anticipate moves before they were officially executed. And as this invisible chess game continued, the coalition found itself reacting to shadows, each move constrained by fear, miscommunication, and uncertainty, a perfect inversion of the trap originally laid, where the intended victim now controlled the tempo, scope, and perception of the conflict, forcing the galaxy to bend to the very species it sought to subdue, proving that patience, adaptability, and subtle mastery could achieve far more than overt aggression, and leaving Counselor Vethrak and his peers to realize that the trap meant to ensure humanity's fall had instead exposed every flaw in their assumptions, command structures, and strategic planning, and that the consequences of underestimating humanity would extend far beyond any single skirmish or sector, marking the beginning of a new era in which Earth dictated the terms of engagement, influence, and respect across the stars. By the time the Coalition finally understood the depth of humanity's inversion of the trap, the galaxy had already begun to shift in subtle but irreversible ways, because every misstep by the alien fleets, every delayed decision, and every fragmented response had been cataloged, analyzed, and exploited. And while humans appeared to be operated within the bounds of normal activity, the reality was that every operation, every fleet movement, every diplomatic gesture had a dual purpose: to test weaknesses and to reinforce the perception that humanity was patient, disciplined, and omnipresent. And as human engineers refined cloaking protocols, sensor arrays, and autonomous control systems, they extended their influence into sectors previously considered inaccessible, establishing observation points disguised as mining operations, trade hubs, or scientific stations, all feeding data into a network that allowed Admiral Keller, Captain Price, and Dr. Moore to coordinate global and interstellar responses with unprecedented precision. And as minor engagements continued to stress alien command structures, humans exploited the Council's over-reliance on hierarchy, protocol, and communication chains, forcing officers to make choices without full information, decisions that created cascading failures in fleet cohesion, logistical support, and morale, while simultaneously maintaining a facade of diplomatic compliance, issuing carefully crafted communiques that emphasized legality, restraint, and reason, all while the Coalition itself grew more divided, internal factions accusing one another of incompetence, disloyalty, or malfeasance. And as neutral species observed the unfolding situation, many began to question whether participation in the Council's actions had been wise, while others began reaching out to Earth in secret, offering intelligence, resources, and support, effectively multiplying the reach of human influence without any overt declaration of war. And as these alliances formed, Admiral Keller orchestrated a series of maneuvers that demonstrated not brute force, but absolute control over timing, space, and perception, human fleets appearing and disappearing, striking precisely where needed, and leaving alien forces unable to predict, respond, or coordinate effectively. And in the political sphere, President Crow leveraged the situation to reinforce unity on Earth, ensuring that public perception, resource allocation, and strategic planning were synchronized, so that every civilian, scientist, engineer, and military member was a contributing part of the larger effort, while Dr. Moore's algorithms continued to simulate every possible counteraction the Coalition might take, constantly updating human doctrine, fleet movements, and logistical networks. And as weeks turned into months, the cumulative effect became undeniable. Alien fleets were hesitant to act. Council sessions were dominated by debate rather than action. Internal distrust grew, and the very trap that had been intended to force humanity into compliance now functioned as a framework for human expansion, learning, and dominance, because every attempt to control, threaten, or coerce had been anticipated, studied, and inverted, and when small-scale engagements escalated, humans responded with precision, disabling systems rather than destroying, capturing ships rather than annihilating, proving to the galaxy that humanity's approach combined restraint with capability, planning with execution, and patience with decisive action, leaving Counselor Vethrak and his peers to confront the terrifying reality that the prey had become the strategists, that the hunters had become the hunted, and that Earth would determine not only the outcome of this conflict, but the rules by which interstellar politics, diplomacy, and warfare would operate from that point onward, marking the irreversible turning of the trap against the galaxy that it sought to subdue it. As the coalition struggled to regain coherence, Earth transitioned from a defensive posture to controlled influence, projecting power without aggression, leveraging its now unparalleled intelligence network, autonomous fleet coordination, and precision operations. And in every sector, humans acted with deliberate restraint, allowing alien forces to reveal overconfidence, overextension, and operational blind spots, while simultaneously weaving a web of alliances with fringe species, former rivals, and neutral systems, creating a lattice of support that expanded Earth's influence faster than the Council could counter. And every small engagement reinforced a narrative that humanity was both unpredictable and unassailable, a species that could strike without warning, adapt instantly, and exploit weaknesses without waste. And while alien commanders debated how to respond, often paralyzed by fear of miscalculation or internal politics, human planners coordinated subtle campaigns, isolating fleets, redirecting supply chains, and executing feints that appeared accidental yet systematically undermined enemy cohesion. And as news of these operations spread through Council channels, factions within the coalition began to withdraw support, negotiate independently, or quietly aid Earth, creating fractures that further accelerated humanity's advantage. While on Earth, Admiral Keller convened combined staff exercises to synchronize military, scientific, and diplomatic efforts across all theaters, ensuring that every operation reinforced a broader strategy rather than acting in isolation, and Captain Daniel Price oversaw forward operations that demonstrated precision and timing so exact that alien observers concluded humans had foreknowledge of events that was impossible, unaware that this was simply the result of patient observation, rigorous analysis, and disciplined execution. And as the months passed, the psychological impact on alien crews intensified with hesitation, replacing initiative, distrust replacing cooperation, and fear undermining morale, while humans continue to operate with calm confidence, reinforcing perception of inevitability. And when the first formal peace overtures came, framed as concessions to avoid further escalation, Earth's leadership carefully evaluated them, knowing that any agreement would be negotiated from a position of strength rather than submission, using every insight gained from months of careful observation, testing, and patient maneuvering. And as President Crow, Ambassador Bennett, and the Council of Earth Advisors drafted responses, they considered not only military and diplomatic implications, but also long-term strategic positioning, ensuring that every concession, every demand, and every gesture served the broader objective of establishing humanity as an unassailable force in the galaxy. And while Counselor Vethrak and his colleagues debated how to present these developments to their homeworlds, human fleets continued to demonstrate operational mastery, disabling enemy systems, redirecting communications, and capturing strategic assets without unnecessary violence, proving that control, intelligence, and discipline could achieve dominance far more effectively than brute force. And as Earth's reputation solidified, neutral and fringe species increasingly aligned with humanity voluntarily, tipping the balance further. And finally, after a year of careful inversion, the coalition itself was forced to acknowledge that their plan to collapse Earth's autonomy had not only failed, but had instead provided humanity with unparalleled insight, strategic advantage, and the ability to dictate the terms of engagement, leaving the galaxy irrevocably transformed by the species it sought to subdue, and demonstrating conclusively that patience, foresight, and adaptability had turned the trap against its architects, marking a decisive shift in the interstellar order. With the coalition fractured, its fleets hesitant, and its diplomats uncertain, humanity moved to consolidate not through conquest but through demonstration, showing that control over logistics, communication, and perception could achieve what brute force could not. And as Admiral Keller oversaw a coordinated operation spanning multiple sectors, Captain Price directed forward units executing maneuvers so precise that alien observers could not comprehend the extent of human coordination, while Dr. Ethan Moore's algorithms anticipated every possible response, continuously updating operational plans, fleet deployments, and intelligence collection. And on Earth, President Crow coordinated diplomacy, industry, and defense, ensuring that civilian and military efforts reinforce one another seamlessly, while neutral systems, impressed by the efficiency, discipline, and patience of humanity, began to recognize the benefits of alignment, sharing resources, information, and strategic support. And as months passed, the Alien Council found itself paralyzed by mistrust, indecision, and fear of miscalculation, unable to present a united front, while human fleets operated with autonomy yet perfect coordination, exploiting vulnerabilities, securing critical routes, and demonstrating that even the most rigid doctrines could be inverted through patient observation, analysis, and adaptive action. And when final communications were exchanged, framed as negotiations to restore stability, Earth's leadership dictated terms that ensured not only the preservation of sovereignty, but also the establishment of influence across multiple systems, alliances, and trade networks, creating a structure in which humanity could shape interstellar policy, monitor potential threats, and respond with speed and precision unmatched by any other species. And as Counselor Vethrak and his peers realized the full magnitude of what had occurred, they understood too late that their trap, designed to force compliance, had instead provided humanity with the insight, preparation, and opportunity to control the very dynamics of power in the galaxy, and that the species they had underestimated, dismissed, and sought to subdue now commanded respect, influence, and authority far beyond what any council vote or military maneuver could dictate. And as Earth's fleets continued to patrol, defend, and observe, a new balance emerged, one where humanity's patience, intelligence, and discipline had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving conclusively that underestimation had been the greatest error the galaxy had ever made, and leaving every species to reconsider not only the strength of humans, but the consequences of provoking a civilization that could think, adapt, and act on scales the Council had never imagined, marking the permanent reversal of the trap, the rise of Earth as a central power, and the enduring lesson that humanity would never again allow itself to be cornered, controlled, or dismissed by any force in the galaxy.